This is a review of my 1999 Honda Civic HX. I've had this car for about a year and a half now, and I've been meaning to make a review of it, and I'm finally finding the time to do so. So I do have a lot of time driving it so far. I've had it for around 15,000 miles. I purchased it with 188,000 miles, and right now I'm up to just about 204,000 miles. HX for high efficiency, so that means a 1.6 liter with EVTEC. It's a single overhead cam engine, and that's mated to a 5-speed manual transmission. I always really liked the way that these cars looked. I thought the two-door styling was just about perfect. I had a 2002 Civic EX, which was the 7th generation, and that car was absolutely bulletproof, but I always wanted one of these 6th generation cars. So some people refer to this as the EK Civic, which I know isn't exactly correct because it's not a hatchback, but you'll see that referred to them as well. So looking at the exterior of the car, right now the car sits on EM1 Si springs that I sourced from the original owner of an Si that had taken the springs off and had them in his garage since the year 2000. So they only had 10,000 miles on them. They're minty fresh. So right now it's a little bit lowered on those Si springs and Koni shocks, and they're the sport yellows. And one of the interesting features the Koni shocks have with these Honda Civic models, you're not gonna be able to see it, but it allows for the perch to be adjusted so you can set the ride height just a little bit lower. So on this car, with the ride height at its lowest setting on those Konis and the Si springs, this is how it sits. So I've had to do a lot of maintenance to the car over the past year and a half, and I'll touch on some of that as we go over the mechanicals. So looking at the brakes, I actually just did the front brakes on the car the other day. I had one of the calipers seize up on me, so I replaced both front brake calipers, and I upgraded to StopTech stainless steel brake lines, and I went with AC Delco Gold OEM rebuilt calipers. It would be possible to upgrade the front brakes on these cars to that of an Integra. It would be a little bit more rotating mass, so it's a larger disc and also a larger caliper. I've never had a problem. I never wanted more brake on this car, so I kept it at a lower rotating mass and just went with the OEM sized discs and calipers. So the HX models, along with a lot of the other Civic models, also came with drum rear brakes. You'll see on this car, I've converted it to disc brakes. And I got rear trailing arms from an Integra, and I replaced every single rear bushing in the rear suspension. That includes the lower trailing arm bushings, upper and lower control arms. Every single bushing in the rear suspension of this car has been replaced. Braking performance now, with a completely rebuilt braking system with stainless steel brake lines on both the front and rear of the vehicle, braking performance is absolutely night and day compared to when I first purchased the car and it was on drum brakes, which weren't performing to the best of their ability. So very spongy brake feel, very long stopping distances. That's no longer the case. So this is a 1999 model, and for 99 and 2000 they had the clear rear taillights, whereas the 96 when the 6th gen was first introduced, it had amber rear tail lights. I should mention the 14-inch wheels that this car comes with from the factory are super light. So I think they're around 11.5 pounds. I've gotten a lot of compliments on the wheels. That being said, they are only 14 inches, so it is a little bit difficult to find tires in a 14-inch size. I think it looks good on the 14-inch wheels. And with more of a sidewall, it does absorb a lot of the road imperfections. That being said, if you wanted more performance-oriented 15-inch wheels, there is a large selection of 15-inch wheels that you could get for this car, and that would give you a sporty drive feel. But for commuting, I don't mind the 14-inch, and they're so light, they're so easy to take on and off, and they're very cheap too. So looking at the rear of the car, you'll see the Konis on there. You'll see the rear discs and calipers. And then the HX model, along with a lot of the other Civics, didn't have a rear sway bar either. And I was able to source an SI rear sway bar along with some of the last OE brackets in the country. I tracked those down. They're the last ones in the supply system. And I put a rear sway bar on it. So that got rid of a lot of the understeer, and it's a much more neutral handling car now than it was when I first got it. So I highly recommend a rear sway bar upgrade. Rear sway bar off the SI was 13 millimeters. So that's what's on the car now. Made a fairly large difference in understeer, so it's a lot more neutral now than it used to be. Very easy to install as well, and minimal weight added to the car. I always really liked the 3/4 windows in this car. Nice big sail windows, you can see out of them really well. Minimal blind spots. I think the proportions are just great. Longer hood, shorter rear. The HX means no sunroof, so no added weight up top. Overall weight of the car is around 2450. Rear disc conversion, that does add a little bit of weight. Rear sway bar, that adds a little bit of weight. But I don't think it's gonna be anything too noticeable. You'll notice, because primarily I use the car for commuting, I did do a passenger side seat delete, so that saves me a little bit of weight there. You'll see I do rock the original club, and I really like that. This is a Covercraft custom sunscreen. Highly recommend that. Nice light blue color. So continuing around the exterior of the vehicle, that pretty much wraps it up. So we'll take a look underneath the hood now. Okay, so under the hood is that 1.6 liter single overhead cam EV-Tech. What that means is below 3,500 RPMs, it sits in a lean burn mode. So that saves a lot on fuel. And then the gearing of the transmission is set up so at highway RPMs, your highway RPMs sit very low. So if you're at around 65 miles an hour, this car is only sitting at around 2,500 RPMs in 5th gear. So for around town, it's not the greatest. It's pretty slow. You definitely have to wind it out. You can't be shy about that. But on highway commutes where it's just sitting there in 5th gear and you're just doing steady 55, 65, 70 miles an hour, fuel burn is incredibly lean. And then around 3,500 RPM, you'll notice a changeover in the cams, and then it almost runs like a regular engine after that point. So it's a little bit different than the dual overhead cam VTEC, where it'll run regular and lower RPMs, and then you'll notice the cam switch over and then it kind of goes into high performance mode. This one's lean burn mode up to around 3,500, 3,400 RPM, and then it'll switch kind of just to normal mode. That's the best way I can describe it. Maintenance is super easy on this car. So you'll see I went with the NGK wires, new spark plugs, valve adjustment, valve cover gasket, new cap and rotor. I sent out the fuel injectors to be professionally ultrasonic cleaned. So rebuilt fuel injectors, professionally cleaned. A new emissions canister here. DC Sport's front and rear shock tower braces. So online it said that this brace would only fit EX model, but the HX has the same intake manifold as the EX. So I rolled the dice, made the purchase, and it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade. You'll see it's a solid brace, so there's no hinge points to it. So very beefy, very solid. You'll see the Koni adjustments that can be made up here to the shocks. Just overall, a really refreshing car to work on. Super easy. Everything's right there for you to access. One thing I'll point out while I'm underneath the hood is, so the HX and some of the other models of that time, besides the EX and SI, so maybe the LX, VX, CX, whatever the other ones are, they have an exhaust manifold with catalytic converter built into it, which is fairly restrictive. This cat has, like I said, just over 200,000 miles on it now, almost 204,000 miles on it. So I don't think it's terribly effective. What I'd like to do is to upgrade the header to an aftermarket header. I see DC Sports makes one for the EX, and there's a way that I'd be able to convert the HX header to an EX style, where I put the catalytic converter after the header and then I run extensions for the O2 sensors. So I'd like to make a video on that. Might reach out to them, see if they'd be willing to sponsor me on that header upgrade if I show how it could fit other models besides the EX. But that's one thing I do have planned for the future. The rest of the exhaust system is pretty rusted out, so I wouldn't mind upgrading the exhaust. At the same time, I want to make sure I do it right, keep it in that OEM plus mode, and don't do anything drastic. Just give it a little bit more performance, a little bit more sound. Right now I already got a little bit of sound with a few exhaust leaks just past that header. So it does have a little rumble to it as it sits. All right, onto the interior of the car. So the factory seats, they do sit a little bit high up. That being said, I got some Integra seats I'll be putting in the car. Integra seats sit a little bit lower, and they also have lumbar adjustment, which you'll see I have a towel as lumbar support, which works fairly well. But the Integra seats do have that built in. If you do pick up one of these cars and you have trouble sourcing Integra seats, they're getting harder to find, you can look up the Miata foamectomy, and it should be very similar to that process if you want to do it to your Civic. So you would pretty much take out the bottom of the seat and cut out a little bit of the foam from the bottom hump, and that should help you sit a little bit lower in the car. But I'll be swapping in those seats pretty soon. So sitting in the car, gauges are straightforward. This is the way it should be. RPMs, speedometer, gas, coolant. Very easy, very straightforward, easy to see. Steering, hydraulic assisted steering, great feel to it. My steering rack has a little bit of play in it, so I will be having to have it either rebuilt or install a new one. It's common for these Honda racks to develop a little bit of play around 175,000 miles. So I've put it off for a little bit. I did try to swap out the inner and outer tie rods and then make an adjustment to the rack to see if that would help, and no luck. So I will have to replace the rack. Steering itself is a little bit slow. That being said, I sourced a GSR Integra rack, and I'm gonna swap out the pinion in the steering rack, and that should help speed up steering a little bit better. So again, there's a lot of mods you can do to these cars. They're kind of a blank slate. All the controls are very nice. They're right at your fingertips. Super simple, you cannot confuse these. I don't know if you can pick up that sound, but just perfect little detents. Very tactile. That's kind of the way that I like it. You see, the mirror was cracked on me, so I went with a wide angle Spoon Sports mirror, and that has a nice light blue color to it, and that matches with that sun blocker for the windshield. So Spoon Sports makes one of those. Very nice, very, very simple to install. I highly recommend that. You'll see my sun visors are nice and duct taped with the airbag warning showing. A little tongue-in-cheek, as when I first got the car, these airbags hadn't yet been through the factory recall for the Takata airbags, and when I had it at the dealer for one of the issues with the car, they did do that airbag recall on the car. Looking at the shifter, so the shifter is almost perfectly placed from the steering wheel, not too far away, easy to reach over, shift. It's always buttery smooth, no matter the temperature, whether it's cold, first thing in the morning, the shifter is always smooth. Even though it's buttery smooth, it is a little bit rubbery, and I think that just has to do with the age, 25-year-old vehicle. You can see there's a little bit of play to it, but it is just silky smooth. And that pairs very nicely with the pedal spacing here. Pedal spacing on this car is absolutely perfect for heel toe downshifting. Just hard to get that one wrong. It's very, very good. There's no rev overhang or rev hang with these cars, so rev matching downshifts is super simple. Instantaneous throttle response, cable throttle, short little armrest from the factory. Not the greatest, but it has an armrest. I adjusted the e-brake when I did the rear disc brake conversion to it. I enjoy not having a passenger seat in here because it just allows for me to throw bags or whatever I need to pick up from the store in here a lot easier. So if you use it as a commuter, highly recommend that mod. Let's see, armrest on the driver's side door. A lot of these older Hondas they got plastic in here that's pretty brittle, so this is kind of worn away. I read that if you were to take off the door panel and fill this with a little bit of window and door spray foam, maybe put a little bit of duct tape underneath the inside of there and fill it with spray foam, that allows for a good way to fix it. So I do have to do that, and I also have to clean up the contacts in these power window switches. So auto down, power mirrors as well. No cruise control, but a decent amount of features. It has air conditioning. And it has a back seat that's usable. Like I mentioned before, no blind spots. And I'm really looking forward to getting that Integra seat in here so I sit a little bit lower in the car. Bolsters are a little bit better. And now with the suspension mods, it's time that I sit in the car a little bit better now that the car can actually handle. So the rear suspension bushings were all entirely shot when I got the car. You could just tell that it was a great handling car, despite the fact that every bushing was shot in it. So when I drove it, it kind of gave me the impression that this is a slightly bigger front wheel drive Miata. And that was with everything in need of replacement. So now it's only gotten to be closer to that. Like I said, it's lightweight, it's reliable. Seats 4. You'll see in here I have the DC Sports rear shock tower brace. Again, very solid piece, very stout. I highly recommend that, combined with the front brace that really tie the car together. There's not nearly the amount of chassis flex in these cars as there would be in a Miata, so they don't need the bracing as much, but for the price and for the quality, I think you can't go wrong. It does cut down on your ability to pass larger things through the trunk. That being said, I did find myself having to crawl into the cabin of the vehicle one day on a cold winter when the doors were frozen, and I was able to still squeeze through there. So yeah, lots of room to haul stuff. So you can definitely make this a daily driver car. It's definitely highly usable. I like the sportiness that it has now to it with the handling, the ride quality. So with those Koni dampeners and SI springs, the ride isn't harsh at all. It's right where I want it to be. It's not too low. I don't scrape on anything. It still absorbs all the bumps. It doesn't beat you up. It also doesn't understeer nearly as bad as it did when I first got it. So it'll understeer at the limit, but just if you're, I don't know, 6/10, 7/10, taking some back roads, it handles pretty neutrally. One of the best things about this car is that I've regularly gotten over 40 miles to the gallon. So it's possible to get around 42 miles to the gallon to the car. I've seen 42 more than a handful of times. Typically I'm somewhere between 37 to 40 miles to the gallon. 42 if it's all highway without traffic. Since I've done that rear disc conversion, I did notice mileage go down about 1 or 2 miles to the gallon. A little bit more rotating mass there. But yeah, I would put overall fuel economy right at 40 miles to the gallon. So you can see what's possible with a lightweight car, naturally aspirated. I wish Honda still made lightweight, naturally aspirated vehicles. I think there would be a market for it, but they're pushing turbos, and all their cars are big now. So this is a golden era Honda. I'm very happy I found one. I have a whole bunch of things that still need to get done with it. So I'll still keep chipping away. That being said, I've done a lot to it and I've been impressed with the way that everything's come apart now. Part availability is still good. And like I said, you can kind of make these cars your own. So that's all I got. I'll post more updates and more maintenance videos as I get about them. So happy motoring.